But perhaps where the biggest difference exists in the big M in marriage versus a little r is the legal standing when you become a parent. Here's what I mean. So when a father has a child born out of wedlock, there are three things that he actually must do in order to have any say-so around the involvement, access, or level of commitment to the child. First, the father must establish paternity. Now, oftentimes people think establishing paternity, suddenly you have rights. But in truth, the only thing paternity means is that you are financially responsible for the child. Welcome to the Dr. G.L. White Show, where we explore the value of Black fathers on strengthening families and building strong communities. Today, we're going to talk about something that's very important, and that's a relationship. But not just a relationship, the concept of being married versus living together or playing married. I make this distinction by calling it the big M for marriage and the little r for relationship. Now, there was a time that the notion of common law or people living together or taking on the life of husband and wife, and the definition of the term, you become common law. That means, for the most part, the world, society, the courts, everyone see you as a actual relationship, but you're not legally bound to one another. But I want you to know that there's a big difference between being married, the big M, and being in a relationship, the little r. Now, someone's going to argue with me, Dr. White, we've been living together and staying together, and there's no need for us to get married. Someone may say, Dr. White, we do everything together. Why or what is the purpose of having a legal document? Well, the big M makes a big difference. Have you ever wondered or seen statistics or research that talks about individuals who have lived together for 5, 10 years and then they finally get married, and something happens after they finally get married, and then 2 to 3 years after they get married, having lived together for all those years, and all of a sudden the relationship begins to have problems? The question is, well, what has happened? What has occurred if you've been living together all that time and then you decide to get married and now problems occur? Well, because the big M and little r are differentiated by expectations, and they're also differentiated by legal standing. So let's take a look at those two: the financial management, the commitment, the parenting roles, the social life, the family structure. Let's take a look at each one of those so you'll understand that there is a big difference between the big M marriage and little r. Well, let's start with financial management. When you're not married, you're living together, or you've taken on the life of one another, there's a big difference around financial management. Because when you're dating, it's honest to say that your money is your money and her money is her money. It's a big difference. But when you get married in the big M, that money or that financial status becomes one. Oftentimes you see when people divorce, or someone has become very successful during the marriage, and then when you go to divorce or the relationship comes to an end, and then you have to split those proceeds. Why? Because the financial management, according to the law, is that when you break up, then that revenue, that money, that life that you've taken is split. So the big M in marriage versus relationship is different. When a relationship ends, it doesn't matter how long you've been living together. When that relationship comes to an end, you certainly depart. We've even seen some NBA players who've argued for a prenuptial agreement and the issues of the relationship coming to an end because one party refuses to have a prenuptial agreement. Although they've been living together and taking on a life as one, even have a child together. But because of that big M in terms of marriage versus the little r, they recognize that dividing financial revenue, dividing financial status and property in terms of the big M, that's a legal process. The little r, like I said, when it's over, you depart. But there's also a difference in the big M in terms of marriage versus the little r in relationship. You see, in a relationship, when a relationship goes awry is or someone cheats in a relationship, that's just called cheating. But in marriage, it's called adultery. And there's some legal consequences between the two. Because when you're married and adultery is committed, then that definitely is grounds for divorce. And that is also comes with added consequences. But in a relationship, commitment, or as far as we go in relationships, it's limited. Yes, the love is there, the bond is there, the relationship is there. Someone may even argue that, Dr. White, the same level of commitment that I have in the relationship will be the same level of commitment that I have in the marriage. But legally speaking, it's not. Because when you break up in terms of commitment and you're not married, you can depart and that relationship is just over. But in the big M, it's a process. But perhaps where the biggest difference exists in the big M in marriage versus a little r is a legal standing when you become a parent. Here's what I mean. So when a father has a child born out of wedlock, there are three things that he actually must do in order to have any say so around the involvement, access, or level of commitment to the child. First, the father must establish paternity. Now, oftentimes people think establishing paternity, suddenly you have rights. But in truth, the only thing paternity means is that you are financially responsible for the child. The child support amount is established, usually up to 23% divided amount across a number of children that are on child support. But in essence, that's it. That is all that paternity does. Now, there was a time in the early 90s that there was this great campaign that the Atlanta Falcons, as well as other teams, about being responsible and establishing paternity. It was a great campaign about being a responsible father. But the problem is, fatherhood is defined one dimensional. It just meant meeting the financial obligation of the child. But that's all paternity does. But in order for the father to have that involvement, he must then move to the next stage, and that is to legitimize the child. Now, the interesting thing about legitimation, TION, always means the process of. So, legitimation means the process of making the child legitimate. That means allowing the father to inherit from the child and the child to inherit from the father. And so, with a legitimate relationship, this is something that becomes absolutely critical. Imagine if something happened to the mother. Imagine if the courts decided that the mother, for whatever reason, was not worthy or the child had to be taken from the mother. If the father has not legitimated the child, then the courts decide what is in the best interest of that child, which means that you as the father, although you pay child support, or although you've established paternity, that does not mean that you automatically get that child. But through legitimation, it must be considered. Here's the other important role of legitimation. Let's say that mother wanted to put that child up for adoption. Well, through paternity and legitimation, she must contact, notify, and get the cooperation from the father. But if he's not established paternity, and if there's no legitimation, she's not required by law because he is not the legal father. So again, I'm making a big distinction between the big M, married, and the little r, relationship. Now, the father's established paternity. He's paying child support. The father has legitimated the child. Now the child has his last name, but he still does not have the right to be physically involved in the child's life. So here's where the big M and the little r kicks in. Because in order for a father who's not married to the child, who's not married to the mother, to have the right to be physically involved in that child's life, and I'm talking about attending school functions, I'm talking about seeing school records, I'm talking about participating in the PTA, he must now, put your seatbelt on for this, he must sue the mother. And in that lawsuit for visitation, he must articulate the terms of his involvement. Oftentimes in court, this is called Exhibit A, where the father stipulates the first, third, and fifth weekend of the month, alternating holidays, Father's Day. So the Exhibit A are the terms that a father must articulate. Again, all this has happened because of the little r. But while they were together in the big M, everything was great. But that's not the case. He must then move to sue the mother. Now, the lawsuit, interesting, even if they're living together, in order for him to have that right to be physically involved in the event that in the little r, everything was going well, but then all of a sudden the relationship goes awry, then he discovers that he does not have those rights. And so the big M is a big difference around the marriage versus the little r. Now, please understand, I'm not telling everyone to go out to get married. I'm just making a distinction between the two. So even if you decide that the relationship is not where it was or what you thought it was going to be, and you decide that you want to have a healthy, functional co-parenting relationship, what I'm going to tell you is to go through the process of paternity, legitimation, and visitation. And again, even if you are living together, if nothing else, legitimate the child. Now, this is the advice that I'm going to give to you, and I'm going to give to every father that has a child born out of wedlock. But it's also the advice that I'm going to give to every mother. Why? Because if something happens to the father, where you would be expecting survivor or Social Security benefits, well, guess what? If the child was not listed as legally his, you may not get that right as well. So the legitimation, if nothing else, is absolutely critical. Let me tell you the story about Tracy and John. When they first got together, it was a beautiful relationship. They had a child together and they were living together. Everything about this relationship was perfect. They weren't married, but it was a beautiful relationship. But something happened. As soon as the child was born, the mother said, "This was not for me." And she left, leaving John with the baby. John was fine with it because having a child, he made a personal, private promise to himself to be a better father to his child than what his father was to him. So John took the baby and raised his son from school activities, functioning, everything. For 8 years, John had not heard from the mother. For 8 years, John had did an excellent job of raising his son. And then one day she showed up. When she showed up, she asked for visitation to see their son. And John, although angry and disappointed and heartbroken, and rightfully so, and oftentimes this is reversed because sometimes this is a story where the father shows up. But in this regard, John was cooperative and allowed her to see the son. It was supposed to be for one day. That one day, for about 4 hours, turned into a full day, which turned into a weekend, which turned into about 5 days. John couldn't hear from her. So he decided to file a court order, set a warrant out to do whatever he can. For whatever reason, they caught up with the mother. She was served and had to attend court. When they got to court, the mother said, "This is my child and I want him back." And for all intents and purposes, the father should have gotten a child. But because he had not legitimated, because he had not established a legal relationship with the child, because there was no order of custody, and because he had not positioned himself to be the legal father of the child, there was nothing the court could do. She took him, and he was heartbroken. But it was in that moment that he realized, because he had never legitimated the child and because he had never established that legal relationship, there was very little he could do. And to complicate things even more, that John couldn't afford an attorney. I'm pretty sure if he would have had representation, clearly there would have been a hold on that. But because he represented himself, and because he had not even established paternity with the child, he had to give him up. This is the reason why when we talk about the difference between the big M and the little r, even within this story, we focus on understanding the actual role of the R, and we bring the balance of establishing a relationship. And you decide that you want to have a healthy, functional co-parenting relationship, what I'm going to tell you is to go through the process of paternity, legitimation, and visitation. And again, even if you are living together, if nothing else, legitimate the child. Now, this is the advice that I'm going to give to you, and I'm going to give to every father that has a child born out of wedlock. But it's also the advice that I'm going to give to every mother. Why? Because if something happens to the father, where you would be expecting survivor or Social Security benefits, well, guess what? If the child was not listed as legally his, you may not get that right as well. So the legitimation, if nothing else, is absolutely critical. So to the both of you, the mother and the father who are engaged in the little R, who have decided to delay the big M of marriage, take my advice, move forward, and build a strong relationship. And when you do, you too will find yourself saying, thank you, Dr. White, for the information you provided. And I will certainly look at you and say, I'll toast to that.